Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Level Up English podcast, the best place to come to practice the English language, learn about the British accent and culture with me, your host, Michael Labers. I have a special episode today that I've been planning or trying to plan for quite a long time, perhaps even more than 1 year. And I finally found the perfect guest to join me in this episode. So today we are talking with Ben Gill from To The Point English. You may have come across Ben before, especially on YouTube. Ben has quite a popular YouTube channel where he mostly looks at topics around the Cambridge English exams. And this is exactly what I wanted to ask Ben about today. Of course, Ben has a lot of knowledge in different areas, but I thought I would make the most of this opportunity and talk with him all about these exams. So specifically, Ben is, as he says in the episode today, quite knowledgeable when it comes to the B2, C1 and C2 exams. So these are the higher level Cambridge exams. And these are quite common. I know many of you either have taken them before or are taking them right now, or maybe you're considering taking the exam in the future. And for you, this will definitely be a useful episode because we cover as much as we can in this short time together. So I try to make the most of the time with Ben and ask about each section of the exam. And I try to cover some common problems or questions that students might have on the exams, such as how to manage your time during the writing exam, different accents that you might hear in the listening exam, and how much advanced English you need to learn to prepare for the exam, and how much time to give for the exam as well. We cover so many things in this short episode, and I know you're going to find it useful. So don't forget to check it out, and Ben gives all his secret tips in today's episode. So hope you enjoy it. If you're not taking the exam, I still think you could get some benefit from this episode because we talk a little bit about general English learning and maybe taking the exam just to test yourself as well. But I do appreciate that this is a more specific topic today, so I hope it will help some of you. And if you're not taking the exam, I hope it's still somewhat interesting. And if nothing else, maybe you can go follow Ben on his social medias. Again, it's To The Point English on YouTube. And Ben's website is TTP English, to the point, ttpenglish.com. So I think I'll leave my introduction there. Let's get right into the episode and hope you enjoy it. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Level Up English podcast. I have a special guest today, Ben from To The Point English. How are you doing?
I'm very well, Michael. Thank you for having me. It's very nice to meet you.
Yes, likewise. Thank you so much for joining me. Appreciate your time. You have kindly come on today because we're going to be maybe talking a little bit about the Cambridge exams. And this is something that I have helped students with in the past, but this was kind of several years ago. I'm very rusty at the moment, so I'm really hoping that I can rely on you a little bit to maybe educate our audience today, if that's okay.
Sure, I'll do what I can.
Nice. Well, maybe if you don't mind, could you give a little bit of a introduction as to who you are, maybe where you post online as well, and that kind of stuff?
Sure, yeah. I'm Ben. I'm an English teacher. I've been teaching English for over 22 years now. So I live in Spain, but I was born in England, just on the outskirts of London. But I really grew up in a village near Cambridge. I've been teaching English for a long time. And a few years ago, I think just over 4 years ago, I started a YouTube channel, which I call To The Point English with Ben. And I started making sort of general YouTube videos for English learners, sort of grammar, vocabulary, pronunciation, the typical stuff. But I have a lot of experience with the Cambridge English exam. So I made one video on how to prepare for the Cambridge English exams that really it got more interest than other videos. So I noticed there was a demand and a need for more help with the Cambridge English exam. So I started focusing more and more specifically on sort of the B2 first, C1 advanced, and C2 proficiency, so the higher level Cambridge English exams, um, because they're big exams and there's a lot to think about in the exams. So I started focusing more and more on those exams and helping people. And yeah, it seems that as I said, people really need a lot of help with these exams. So I'm doing my best to help them, and I've been offering sort of courses and classes and really focusing on those exams for the last 3 years, I would say.
Fantastic. And is a lot of your work now online, or are you working also in person?
No, it's all online now. All my since I started, because really I started the YouTube channel during the pandemic, like a lot of people. I think there are a lot of English teachers and other other fields people starting to offer. They're starting to do podcasts or YouTube channels and things like that because they had a bit more working from home and having a bit more time. So pretty much from that moment, I started transitioning away from in-person classes and doing everything online. So I have some sort of regular classes like traditional, but through Zoom or through um, video conferencing platforms. But also, yeah, a lot of people specifically, most of my students specifically are preparing for the Cambridge English exam. So it's just helping them prepare for those, really.
I see. Okay. From what I understand about the exams, it might depend on where you are in the world, like what country you are. I think different countries will, some countries will focus more on the IELTS exam, maybe some will on the Cambridge. I might be wrong, but that's my understanding. And also, maybe it will be good to quickly mention who might want to take the exam. I don't know if it is, only for specific reasons like getting into university, or maybe
Hmm.
it could be a good exam to take just out of interest and to test yourself. I don't know. Do you see those kind of students too?
Yeah, yeah. I see a variety of reasons for taking the exam, and also depending on the level. I mean, B2 first, it's often sort of secondary school students, but also older students too. But and the higher levels, the C1 advanced, for example, is the one that most many companies and institutions like universities require sort of a C1 level, and many specify that they not just any C1 exam, they want the Cambridge C1 advanced exam. As you said, IELTS is very popular with sort of immigration purposes and also some universities. But I think generally the Cambridge English exams for if you need a C1 or perhaps a C2 level, it's less common for companies to require a C2 level. It can happen, um, but then the Cambridge English exams are very prestigious. I think that the
Mm.
most prestigious exams, so the most respected. For example, in Spain, where I live in Spain, they have their own official language school, C1 level. Um, but in my experience, the C1 level for the official language school in Spain is not the same level as the C1 advanced Cambridge English exam. C1 advanced,
Mm.
it's more demanding, the Cambridge English exam. So therefore, it's more respected, it's more prestigious. If you just need a C1 level, maybe there are easier exams. They shouldn't be. C1 should be C1 wherever you are, wherever you prepare. But the Cambridge exams are they're big exams and they're very demanding. So I think if you really want that level of prestige, I would go for the Cambridge exams. But you were asking, there are also a lot of people who take the C2 proficiency, which is the highest level. They're just doing it for a personal challenge. You get a lot of English teachers who have been teaching English for many years. They have a very high level of English, but maybe they've got stuck in a rut a little bit. They're just teaching lower levels and they don't really feel that they're challenging themselves, and they just want something to focus their studies and give themselves that boost. And that's probably the most common reason for taking the C2 proficiency exam. It's like a personal challenge. So yeah,
Yeah.
many different reasons, but yeah.
Yeah, I can imagine that. I've had students before too who are like that, where their English in some ways is better than mine. Like their vocabulary is so good.
Yeah.
And yet they still want to go further. And it's I think at that stage it's more just like a hobby and interest. And not
Yeah.
not to say that that exam is only for that purpose. But I guess, yeah, as you said, it's more common. But yes, it's
Definitely,
very,
yeah,
very good to see though. Yeah.
yeah.
But I think it would be nice. I should say, first of all, it's such a big exam. And obviously, as you said, there are different levels and different sections in the exam as well. So it's way too much to cover in one episode.
Mhm.
So I kind of thought we could cover, maybe try to get to each section and just do some general questions there. We'll see if we have time. I
Mhm.
don't know. But obviously,
Right.
it won't be that detailed. But
Sure.
maybe to decide where we start, what section of the exam do you see students having the most trouble with? Is it possible to point one out?
It's difficult because it does depend on the student, but
Yeah.
I mean, there are basically four papers for, in it, I mean, whether we're referring to the B2 First, C1 Advanced, or C2 Proficiency, there are four papers. You have the reading and use of English. So some years ago, they were two papers. There was the reading was one paper, the use of English was another paper. Now they're together. There's the reading and use of English, the writing, the listening, and the speaking papers. So those are the four papers. But within those papers, like the reading and use of English for the C1 Advanced, there are 8 parts. In the writing, there are 2 parts. Students have to write 2 compositions. In the listening, there are 4 parts, and in the speaking, there are also 4 parts. So there are a lot of parts of the exam. But to answer your question, I think it's the writing paper that most students struggle with. Well, I'm sure
Mm.
actually, students often share their results statements with me when they get them, when they've passed, hopefully their exams. And I would say over 90% of the statements I see, it's the writing score is the lowest. It's not 100%, but I would say
Yeah.
around 90%. I think that's just because we don't write that much these days. I mean, we write lots of text messages and maybe emails, but actually sitting down and spending 45 minutes to write an essay or a report or a review in any language, whether it's your own language or English, it's just we're not familiar with it. So students really struggle with just how to write and how to organize their compositions. So unfortunately, it's the one area that I recommend students focus on and really practice, but that most people hate it. So they kind of try to avoid it at all costs and always looking for any sort of shortcuts or tips to make it easier. And there are tips for strategy and things you can do to make it a little easier. But it's at the end of the day, it's practicing and making the effort and really doing as many sample tasks as possible. So yeah, that's probably uh, the most difficult paper or the most challenging paper, I think, is the writing. But individual parts, there are like in the reading part. There's one it's kind of infamous. It's called the gapped text, where students have to choose paragraphs to complete a long text, and it's really tough. In the listening, the last part of the listening. Cambridge can be really cruel because you have the reading and use of English, the writing, and then the listening. Speaking is sometimes on a different day, but and
Mhm.
then the last part of the listening. So you've been maybe 3 hours to taking this exam, and the last part of the listening is probably it's one of the most difficult parts of the whole exam. So you're tired and maybe getting a bit distracted, and you have to make this really big effort to focus on this last listening task. So, and that's a big part of it, just staying focused throughout the exam. And as I said, it's a big exam, and people really underestimate it sometimes how challenging it can be.
Yeah, and I think with many exams, like I know more about the IELTS exam personally, but it's
Hmm.
not just about improving your English; it's also understanding the structure and the format of the exam as well. So
Yeah,
I imagine that's a big part of this as well.
that's huge.
But
Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
That's because my preparation courses really focus on strategy, the approach for every part, because you should be improving your English level. You should be expanding your vocabulary, revising the grammar, and all those things. Anyway, that should be a part of your English learning journey. But for the exams, it's as you said, it's a lot about developing a strategy for every part of every paper. So yeah,
Mhm, mhm, mhm.
definitely.
Well, speaking of that, then maybe we could start with writing. get the
Hmm.
hardest, maybe the hardest one out of the way. Um, Obviously, if you think of anything else that you might like to advise, you're welcome to bring it up. I've just got a few questions in mind. Like, I think one thing that people struggle with is managing their time. Maybe I think they have like 90 minutes, is it, or something? Um,
Yeah.
and the time management can be challenging. So, do you have any tips or suggestions around time management?
Yeah, that is a really good point. It's it's very difficult to write two compositions in 90 minutes, so basically 45 minutes each. For the B2 first, it's 40 minutes per composition. Well, it depends how you divide your time, but it's an
Mhm.
hour and 20 minutes. But for the C1 advanced and C2 proficiency, it's 90 minutes. Yeah. So yeah, time management is extremely important. I think most students find the first time they try to write an essay, for example, they can't do it in 45 minutes. And sometimes it takes them 2 hours and they think, well, this is just impossible. I can't do it. But the more you practice, the easier it gets. For me, the biggest tip, the most important thing regarding the writing, when we're talking about time management, is planning. Before you start writing the first word, you should plan. You should spend, I know most teachers recommend 5 or 10 minutes planning before you start writing. I actually recommend 15 minutes. So 15 minutes of 45 planning, but quite detailed planning how you're going to structure the essay, for example. I mean, you should, if you've practiced, you should know basically how you're going to structure it. You know where you're going to include different information. But think about how you're going to present the ideas. Think about even what vocabulary you're going to use. Think of sort of linkers and cohesive devices you can use. Maybe sort of list 5 or 6 cohesive devices or linking words. Maybe some adjectives you think you can use, some fixed expressions. Maybe even think what grammar structure can I use to present this idea? Maybe you can use a conditional or a cleft sentence, or think about the passive voice. So before you even start writing, because a big mistake many students make, they think, oh, I don't have much time, I just need to start writing. And actually that's going to take them longer in the end because they're going to have to start making changes, crossing sentences out and st- starting again. And just if you plan thoroughly for 15 minutes, you should be able to write the text in about 25 minutes, and then maybe you'll have 5 minutes if everything goes to plan, which usually doesn't, but maybe you'll have 5 minutes at the end just to check sort of any sort of silly little mistakes you've made like spelling mistakes, or maybe you've used grammar mistake, maybe you've a basic grammar mistake. So yeah, planning 15 minutes, writing about 25 minutes, and then maybe 5 minutes for checking.
Hmm. I
But
think
yeah, time management
yeah,
is important. Yeah.
that
Mm.
sounds really good. Yeah, and it's kind of, as you said, counterintuitive. Like, not what you would
Mhm.
expect, that you have to spend time planning, which takes away from your writing time. But yeah, I
Yeah.
think there's a, I don't know if you know it. There's an expression, something like that. I can't remember it exactly now, but it's like, a few minutes planning is, it's gone. But it's like, basically planning is very important. You know what I'm thinking of?
Well, there's one. I don't know if I'm going to remember it. I think it was Abraham Lincoln or someone said, like,
Oh,
if you give me 3 hours to chop down a tree, I'll spend the first two sharpening the axe, or something like that.
oh, I actually haven't heard that.
Something
That
like that.
wasn't what I was thinking. But I
Right.
think for if anyone's watching this on YouTube, I'll put the quotes I'm thinking of here, and also that one as well. I like that one. But
Yeah.
yeah, importance of planning. That's a great way to remember it. Just
Yeah.
think of that axe.
Exactly. Yeah. If you're trying to cut a tree with a blunt axe, so it's not sharp, it's going to take you a lot longer, a lot more effort. But if you, I think there are a few quotes like that, but that's the one I like a lot. Yeah, just spend the time sharpening the axe, and it'd be much easier to cut down the tree. I mean, it's also about the planning process is really, and this thing again seems sort of contradictory, but it's where you're editing. You edit in the planning. So most people think that you edit a text or something when you're finished, but you can't really do that in the exam because you're gonna have to start crossing
Mhm,
sentences out. If you're doing the paper based, if you're doing the computer based, you can sort of just delete it and or copy and paste it. But if you can edit before you start writing, so editing, because really a big part of the writing. in the exams is being concise. Less is more, really, because you don't have many words, you don't have much time, so you have to think, okay, I'd like to include this piece of information, but is it really relevant? And do I really need it? So maybe no, I'll keep that out. I'll take that out, or not take it out. You just don't write it. Just so edit before you start writing. Again, it seems a strange concept, but that's how you need to be thinking.
That's a good tip too. I like that. Um,
Mm,
what about here's perhaps a slightly challenging question, but I actually have no idea what the answer would be. Um, I think a lot of students might struggle between trying to use more advanced structures like advanced grammar, advanced vocabulary, and potentially making a mistake, or
mm.
sticking with what they know, which is simpler, easier language, and not making mistakes. So, do you think it's worth taking the risk to try to use more advanced structures in the writing section?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it's. I would say this. It is worth taking the risk, but only to a certain extent. I mean, you don't want to. If you're not confident with the grammar, like the conditional is a typical example. If you think I'm going to try and use the third conditional, but you really can't remember the structure, then perhaps don't risk it. But if you're relatively confident, but I think the examiners appreciate the effort with grammar and vocabulary. So even if you don't get it 100% right, you may still gain some marks for using it appropriately in the context, even if perhaps you forget to use the past perfect and you use the present perfect. So in general, yes, but it has to be a calculated risk. You don't want to, just. I think it's a very good question because some students, I read some writing compositions where students have just obviously tried to fill it fill their text with advanced grammar structures and advanced vocabulary, and there are a lot of mistakes, and they've used the inappropriate vocabulary. It's very difficult to read. So in that case, no, they take it too far. But it's a balance. You have to use common sense a little bit.
That yeah, that definitely makes sense. So I guess if you
Mm.
if you are somewhat confident that you can understand it and you get it right, then maybe use it. But if you have no idea, yeah, maybe don't try and stick to what you might get right.
Yeah. One more thing I would say there. These writing compositions are quite short, so you're not going to include like 20 advanced grammatical structures. I recommend students just learn three or four. Just make sure to become really confident with three or four that they know that they're going to be able to use and be confident using them. So, as I said, a cleft sentence structure or a second conditional structure or something, just that you feel confident that you can use in any or more, in any essay, for example, whatever the topic may be. So, you don't need to use all of them. I mean, you need to revise the grammar for the other parts of the exams, but for your writing, it's the same with the vocabulary. Just if you can use learn a few adjectives or fixed expressions that you can use in almost any writing composition, then it's going to make you a lot easier to write your text.
Hmm. Yeah, that's a nice way to simplify it. Yeah, I like that.
Hmm.
Uh, I have so many more questions about writing, but in the interest of time, I think we should move on.
Sure.
Maybe
Yeah.
to speaking. I know that this obviously is an area that a lot of people are quite scared of because
Mm.
it's I don't know, feels more live. You know, you can't really edit, you can't change your mind as easily when you're speaking. Uh,
Yeah.
Even in my native language, English, I get very nervous speaking, so that's another factor.
Yeah. Me
Um,
too.
maybe what I think one question I had is how can people make sure that their answers are good enough? Like for example, if I asked you, a question might be, is it part one or like where it's like uh, do you like your job? It's like a yes or no question,
Hmm.
right? So for a question like that, how would you respond?
Well, with all the questions, I think you can sort of follow the same structure, more or less, the same dynamic. Is you answer it. So it could be a yes or no question, or it may be like, what do you like most about your job? So you answer it, of course, and then just think, okay, why? Ask yourself why, or just expand a little. So answer the question. Make sure you answer the question and then expand a little. In part one, the examiners don't want very long answers. That's really what they want is the answer to the question and then an explanation or a justification or whatever. So just ask yourself, because you really don't want to hear the question why from the interlocutor, because if the interlocutor asks you why, they're helping you or they're trying to elicit more information from you. They're trying to get you to speak, and you should be forthcoming with that. You should be proactive. So answer the question and expand with why why that is the answer to your to the question. But in the C2 proficiency, for example, some of the questions are quite deep and philosophical, especially later in the discussion part, for example. And sometimes it's difficult to give short answers because sometimes like a question might be, "What is the key to success?" You think, well, you could write a book about that, but to answer in sort of 20 seconds in an English exam, it's very difficult. It's difficult to be concise sometimes.
I hate to put you on the spot, but since you brought it up, how would you answer that one?
Oof. Oh God, yeah, I hate it. I hate when the tables are turned because I like to do the asking, not the answering. Um, well, one thing you have to remember, and I will try to answer it, but
Mm,
it's not really what you say that it's important. It's how you say
mm.
it. You're not expected to be an expert in any topic or a philosopher or anything like that. These questions are to stimulate a response and to get the the student, the candidate speaking. So the the questions are difficult in the C2 proficiency because that's part of the test to be able to think of what to say. So, what's the key to success? Most answers to most questions in the exams can start with it depends. So you could always just say it depends. It depends on the individual. It depends on what area of life we're referring to. Some people see success related to sort of the job or more material aspects of life, where others, you could say, for me, for example, in my case, I consider happiness and having a stable family life to be the key to success, for example. But again, I mean, a lot of candidates worry about that they're saying something a bit silly or not very profound. You don't have to say anything profound. It's, as I said, it's how you answer the question. It's the vocabulary, the grammar, the pronunciation, the fluency that's important rather than giving a what you consider a really profound, complete answer.
Yeah, I like that. So even if maybe secretly someone might think the answer is totally stupid and they totally disagree,
Mhm.
it's irrelevant in the exam as
Yeah,
long as your English is good, right? That's a good point.
exactly. You have to answer the question at all times,
Uh-huh.
but as long as you're answering the question, what you say, it's not so much. It's not the issue. It's how you say it.
Mm. How about dead air? Dead air, if anyone doesn't know, is like when there's silence and you don't know what to say. Maybe when you're thinking or between a sentence. What about that?
Yeah, that's tricky, and I actually think the Cambridge exams are a little bit unfair. For example, in part two of the C1 Advanced, you have pictures. You have three pictures. You have to choose two of the pictures. This is the speaking exam, of course, and you have to compare the pictures and answer two questions all in 1 minute. So 60 seconds is nothing. It's very little time. So some people just naturally, it has nothing to do with their level of English, but some people just need time to gather their thoughts before they speak. I'm that way, for example. Other people can just start speaking immediately. Again, it's not nothing to do with their level of English. It's just the way they are, the way their brain works. But you can't spend sort of 10 seconds thinking about how you're going to answer the questions or which pictures you're going to choose because 10 seconds out of 60 it's a big chunk of your time. So, and that's where I feel that the Cambridge exams can be a little bit unfair. I mean, it is what it is, so you just have to practice and deal with it. But yeah, dead air is never good. In the interactive tasks, when you're with a partner, you can hopefully your partner can jump in if you're a bit stuck with for what to say. But when you're in the long term, when you're on your own, yeah, you can be honest. I think it's important to be honest and natural. Just say so. If it's a difficult question, you say, "Phew," just say that. Is that, "Oh, that's a difficult question. I'd never considered this before." But if I had to say something, perhaps we could. So while you're gathering your thoughts, just say something. Just don't sit in silence thinking. Just have some fixed expressions prepared to fill this silence while you're gathering your thoughts.
Yeah, I like that. So basically, you're kind of walking the examiner through your thought process to get to
Mhm.
an actual idea. Like, let me think about this. I've never thought. Yeah, so it's you're filling in that
Yeah,
space, and I guess that's what we do naturally in conversation as well, which is good.
exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and
Try to keep it. People tend to panic in exams when they can't think of something to say, and that just makes the whole situation worse because your mind goes blank. If you can just relax, take a breath, and just keep it natural as possible.
yeah,
Yeah.
for sure, for sure. Maybe we can move on to reading now. Uh,
Hmm.
there's one here that I really wanted to ask you about. This is obviously if there's anything that I'm missing on this, you can bring it up, of course. But I wanted to ask you
Hmm.
about keyword transformations.
Hmm.
I think that's part of the reading paper. Is that right?
Well, it's the use of English, it's reading and use of English. So
Right.
it's the part four of the yeah, part of it's that paper, the reading and use of English paper. Yeah.
Okay. Because I again I don't really do this exam stuff, but this particular exercise I've done quite a lot in the past because
Hmm.
I think it's so useful to look at these. I guess it's
Yes.
training your uh, collocations or your knowledge of expressions and stuff as well. So
Yeah.
one example I have, just in case anyone doesn't know what I'm talking about, I try to find an easy one online. You're given a sentence and then you have to usually reword that phrase or sentence using usually one word that they give you, right? I don't know if I explained that well,
Hmm.
but maybe actually I can ask you this one to see if you can help me. So the
Hmm.
first sentence is
Okay.
I cannot type very well,
Hmm.
and the new sentence you have to make starts with I am, and you have to
Hmm.
include the word at at. So I cannot
Hmm.
type very well. Do you know what that would be?
Hmm. I guess it would be. I'm not very good at typing.
Yeah, I guess it depends on how many words they give you, right? I'm not good or I'm bad at typing. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I
Yeah,
yeah.
I mean, sometimes more than one option is accepted if it's if it's within the word. It depends on the exam, which exam, because B2 first. No, I can't remember, but it's from 3 to 6, I think.
Okay.
Well, each exam has different word limit for that task. So you have the first sentence, then you have a given word which you can't change. You must use that word as it's given, and then follow-up sentence with a gap in it, and you need to fill in the gap with and reproducing the same idea as the initial sentence. So it's very difficult. Yeah, I mean, it, as I said, often there's more than one possible answer. If it's grammatically correct and it's following all the rules, it's using the word that's given, and you're not writing more or fewer words, then it's okay.
Yeah, yeah. I don't know why I tried to explain what it was because I should have just left it to you because that was way better than my explanation. But yeah, I mean, I found in the past what problem students have is if they don't know the expression, like obviously you knew the the phrase "good at," you knew that they come together. But if
Hmm.
you don't know the new phrase or expression, then how can you answer it? So I don't know if you have any advice on that or to prepare for that type of question.
Well, that's what I mean. The use of English part of the exam, or the parts, are challenging for that reason, because it's sort of grammar and vocabulary altogether. As you said, collocations, phrasal verbs, fixed expressions, idioms, prepositions, and yes, sometimes, unfortunately, you just either you know it or you don't. You either know that collocation, you know that phrasal verb, you know that idiom, or you don't. in that part, the keyword transformation, often there's a grammar aspect and a vocabulary aspect, because you get 2 marks. You can get anything from 0, 1, or 2 marks for each question. So if you get it completely wrong, you get 0 marks. If you get one aspect of the answer right, which it could be the grammar aspect, you get 1 mark. If you get both, so the grammar and the vocabulary, you get 2 marks. The grammar, you can that this is the thing, especially with the higher level exams like the C1 and C2, you can study all the grammar. It's possible to study all the grammar and revise all the grammar and really get to know the grammar you need. You can't learn all the vocabulary in English. I don't know all all the vocabulary in the English language. I imagine you don't know all the vocabulary in the English language. We are English teachers. You should, during your preparation process, you should be expanding your vocabulary and keeping a vocabulary notebook specifically for the exam. But even then, there will probably be vocabulary in the exam you don't know, no matter how many years you spend preparing it. So the only tip is to use your instinct. Often you may not have come across that collocation before. Or you may have done, but you don't remember it. You may have read it once, and there may be something in the back of your mind which just tells you instinctively that it's good at, for example, good. The preposition with good is at, or bad is at, or certain, phrasal verbs. You think, I just don't know this phrasal verb. I don't know what it is. Well, just write something, because maybe somewhere in the back of your mind you've come across this phrasal verb before. Um, but yeah, at the end of the day, if you don't know it, you don't know it. But that's why you just have to be. That's. I mean, you should be doing this. English students should be expanding their vocabulary constantly if they're taking, if they take it seriously. But for the exam preparation, it's a big part of it is just that's why I recommend that you read lots of articles and take notes when you come across any new vocabulary. It's it's difficult, unfortunately. I mean, that's often sort of my final sentence when I'm talking to students. When they ask me for advice, I give them advice, and I say, yeah, it's difficult. These are tough exams. That's the reality of it. I can give tips on strategy and approach, but at the end of the day, you have to make a big effort to expand your vocabulary and revise the grammar.
Yeah, I like what you said as well about just doing lots of reading and stuff as well, because maybe I imagine there are some students who might make the mistake of only studying. I would say it's a mistake anyway. Only studying like exam specific course books or textbooks,
Mm,
but I think you can improve in any way, right? Like listen to a podcast, read any kind of book, and learn through that way. It's not just about for the exam, right? So I guess anything you're doing is going to be helpful in preparation.
definitely, yeah, yeah. I think. I mean, I recommend that you, because reading anything is good. It's really important. It's and reading books is fantastic. But I actually recommend reading articles like um, BBC, Guardian, any sort of website articles on a variety of different topics. Because if you read a book, it could take you like 3 months to read a book in English, and it's good. You are getting a lot of benefit from it, but it's sort of the same topic, the same style. If you read different articles, you could read one article on artificial intelligence one day, another article on gardening the next day, an article on photography the next day. So you're really expanding a wide range of vocabulary.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
it's more useful, in my opinion, to read lots of short articles rather than sort of 2 or 3 books a year, for example.
Yeah, it makes sense. And of course, there's no shortage of them on the internet these days. So yeah, that's a good tip.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
I wanted to ask you this at the beginning, but I forgot. But speaking of preparing, how much time in advance of the exam would you suggest people give to prepare and plan, or does it depend on the person?
Yeah. Unfortunately, yeah. This is the big question. So many people, so many students ask me that. I'm thinking of taking the C1 Advanced. How much time do I need to prepare? It depends. Where are you now? What level are you at now? Do you have a C1 level now and you just need to prepare for the exam? Do you have a B2 level and you need to, you know, reach a C1 level? how much time can you dedicate daily to the preparation? If you can only dedicate 2 hours a week, you're going to need a few months. If you can dedicate 3 hours a day, you can do it in a lot less time. But people do want an answer to that question. So my fixed answer is at least 2 months. And some people are quite shocked by that because some people decide to take the exam in 2 weeks and they think 2 months, but it does depend. I mean, if you have your exam in 2 weeks and you haven't started preparing, I don't want you to think, I don't want you to
Mhm.
panic. It just means you need to be quite. The thing is, people underestimate the exams. As I said before, they decide they want to take the exam and then they start preparing and they realize quite quickly that they're going to need a lot more time. As I said, these are big exams, 8 parts in the reading and use of English, 2 parts in the writing, 4 parts in the listening, and 4 parts in the speaking. It's a lot to do, and you need to practice. So yeah, sort of if you want as most people do when they ask me that, they just want a short, concise answer. I would say 2 months, but it does depend on the individual.
Okay, I see. But it's funny because I used to get a lot of questions regarding the IELTS exam, and it was often like, Michael, I've booked my exam. It's happening in 6 days. Can you help me this week? Well,
Yeah.
maybe we can have a couple lessons, but it's quite, we're not going to be able to get to do that much because what I used to suggest, I guess it's similar for Cambridge exams. If you split up the sections of the exam into the time you have left, like if there's 4 parts or 4 papers and you have 4 weeks, that's 1 paper a week if you're doing it evenly.
Hmm.
And then there's different sections, as you said. So how many sections can you do in 1 week? And then it starts to seem a lot like a lot less time when you do it that way, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that example you gave, I had that a lot with sort of people who have job interviews, for example. So I have
Mm,
a job interview next week in English. Can you prepare? Can you help me prepare? And yes, that's perhaps a little easier to prepare. But if you don't have the level, that's why people should just be improving their English level. Not maybe as intensively as you do when you're preparing for an exam, but just in general, for in preparation for these situations, job interviews or exams, because you never know when you'll need your English. But yeah, unfortunately many people come to me like you when it's too late. Not necessarily too late, but they should have really been. As I said, I don't want to be negative and say because maybe there are people listening to this who have their exam next week and they haven't prepared. It's possible, but it's you're making it's very difficult. So I think and that's really the reason that most people fail is lack of preparation or lack of really understanding what it is to take these exams,
yeah, yeah.
and often it's too late when they
I think
realize.
that makes sense. Anyone hearing it now, it's just giving them more motivation to prepare, regardless of how much
I hope
time.
so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very quickly, we can just do a couple minutes on this now. I think listening is the last one we haven't spoke about, right? Um,
Hmm.
so uh, yeah, I think maybe I'll link to it. I don't know if you have any resources on this on your website, but just like a quick overview of the exam.
Hmm.
We haven't really done that too much today for time, but like
Hmm.
the format of the exam. But I'll leave that out for now, maybe. But
Yeah.
in the listening exam, I've heard you might be faced with different accents. What accents
Hmm.
should students prepare for?
Well, the higher level the exam, the stronger the accents you could
Okay.
get. I mean, B2, you may B2 level, you could get an American accent, Irish accent, English, Scottish, but they're clearer. They're not. They speak the speakers in the listening on the audios. They speak sort of more slowly and more clearly. The C2 proficiency level, for example, you could get a Glaswegian, for example, a Scottish person from Glasgow who speaks quite naturally. So, or you could get Canadian, Australian, American. So, what should they prepare for? I think they should just be prepared for all accents. And often people say they watch British English
Mhm.
series because they prefer British English, or they watch American films and series because they prefer American English. I know people have their preferences, but for the exams and again for your general English, you should be exposing yourself to a wide range of different accents. This happens to me. I live in Spain, so I'm used to Spanish, the Spanish accent from Spain, and when I have to speak to someone from Colombia, for example, or Argentina, sometimes I struggle a little bit because I don't. The pronunciation is quite different. So for the exams, yeah, I recommend you listen to podcasts, of course, because again, you can improve your listening when you watch films and series. Of course, that's great, but the visual information you're getting helps you. You know, when you watch a film or series, a lot of it is visual, even if you don't realize. So the sort of non-verbal communication, facial expressions help you. That's information that helps you understand, which is great. That's part of communication. But in the exams, in the listening paper of the exam, you don't have any of that visual information to help you. So you need to get used to just listening,
Mhm.
exclusively listening. So podcasts are great, and there are so many free podcasts out there.
Mm.
So it's all good.
Yeah, yes. I mean, by all means, keep listening to this podcast and watching Ben's channel. But
Exactly.
maybe in addition to that, other accents as well. Maybe find creators and podcasters from these other countries. Uh, but yeah, I mean, it is hard. It's definitely practice because even I'm from the like you maybe the south of England, and even when I go up to
Mm,
Manchester, it's not even that far away relatively. I
mm,
sometimes have trouble understanding them. Like, what? Say that again, and it might take a couple of times just
yeah,
because I'm not really used to it. So practice definitely makes
yeah,
perfect.
yeah. For example, in the C2 proficiency, they do have a range of accents. They're not usually the strongest
Yeah,
accents. I mean, that it's not. They're not going to try and catch you out with a really strong
some Irish
dialect, or
farmer.
because it's not just about the accents. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I don't want people. Again, I don't want to scare people to think that they. It's not that extreme, but you know, it is. They try to make it as close, closer to sort of natural conversation or speech than the lower levels, for example.
Yeah, yeah. This is kind of a broad question, of course, but do you have any more like general tips for the listening section that come to mind before we move on from this one?
Yeah, well, really, it's a lot about with in the Cambridge exams. You get two chances to listen to the audio in every part. In every exam, you know, even the C2 proficiency, you hear the audio twice. So stay calm because the first time you listen, maybe you'll think you're lost. You haven't got a clue what the what's going. What you can't hear the answer. You can't imagine where the answer may be. But the first listen, just try and get a general idea. Um, Try to follow what the speakers are saying and the gist, so the general idea of what they're saying. And then the second time, you will notice that everything becomes a lot clearer. Sometimes okay, so that's answering that question. That's answering that question. Um, and don't panic if you do get a little bit lost because, and this is true of the whole exam. In the Cambridge English exams, it's the global score that counts. You know, everyone has their weakest parts. You may have a disaster in one part or even in one paper. You may just think, oh, this is terrible. Don't panic because you can compensate in other parts. So if you get quite a low score in one paper, you can compensate in another paper. So, and I say that about the listening because people do panic more in the listening because they just feel they get lost and that they just haven't got a clue what the what is being said. But if you panic, it's just going to make it a lot worse if you start to. And often it's about, and this again sounds a bit counterproductive, but not listening too hard. I don't know if this is something you've noticed when students listen too hard and they try to understand every single word and every syllable of every word. They're not just getting they're not hearing what is being said. They're focusing too much on the individual sounds. And they need to sort of step back a little bit and try to understand the general idea.
That's so relatable. Like for me personally, like I
Yeah.
think it was like 10 years ago, I took a Japanese exam, and I think listening was my
Mm,
hardest one. And I think it might be why I failed actually, because it was exactly that. I
right.
was really listening hard, and I was also very nervous and panicky. And yeah, it was just I was
Mm,
focusing on each word, and I couldn't form it into a sentence. So yeah, that kind of
yeah.
clicked for me when you said that. Maybe take a step back and try to absorb the meaning without giving every word your attention. Maybe that's a good skill to practice. Maybe when
Yeah.
listening to us now, listeners can be practicing that
Hmm.
skill.
Yeah, exactly. It's all about practice, and because listening to podcasts in general, but also listening to sample tasks, and on YouTube you can find lots of sample listening tasks for the Cambridge English exam. So even at first, and people don't like it when I say this, but if you're taking if you're preparing for the C1 advanced exam, it's not actually a bad idea sometimes to start with the B2 first listening tasks just to get used to it, and then step up to the C1 advanced, because sometimes it can feel very intimidating and very overwhelming. But people think, "But I'm C1 level, I shouldn't be doing B2 tasks." But it's just to get a feeling for the tasks, because they're very similar. So, but obviously the level is lower, but the format is basically the same.
Kind of gets the ball rolling and gets you into the feel of the question. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Nice. Well, I try my best to get through a very brief kind of look at each paper and ask you some couple of questions that came to my mind that I've also heard from students. But as I said before, there's so much we could talk about, so it's not that complete. But maybe that's a good reason for listeners and viewers to go over and look at your website, your channel, and things like that. So would you like
Hmm.
to plug that now and share where people can find you?
Thank you very much. Yes. Yeah, my YouTube channel is called To the Point English with Ben. Just to the point. English should be enough, but with Ben, if that's the complete title. My website is ttpenglish.com, I think. Yeah, ttpenglish.com. So TTP is to the point. It's, the first letter of each word. TTP English with Ben. Yeah, and you can find. Also, I have. I am relatively active on Instagram. Not as really. YouTube is my platform really. So I have hundreds of videos on there. It's not only Cambridge English exams. I have vocabulary videos and grammar videos, but they're kind of all oriented towards Cambridge exam preparation. But yeah, you can find something for everyone, I think.
Amazing. Yeah, I will put links to everything so people can find it easily. I definitely recommend your YouTube channel. I don't have it open now, so I can't remember what they were, but there were some videos that I thought was so like specific and that really good topics on like particular phrases or something that I think anyone's ever
Hmm.
made before. So there's definitely some unique and good content there. I'll have to look and see remember what I'm talking about.
Thank
But
you.
yeah, good job on that.
Yeah, I try to focus on different like
Yeah.
collocations, phrasal verbs, idioms, just so people can build their vocabulary that way. Again, thinking of the exams, but vocabulary is not just for exams, and grammar is not just for exams. It's for your life in general. So yeah, it's all useful, I think.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, Ben, thank you so much. It's been so nice to talk with you and pick your brain a bit on this topic. So I really appreciate it, and maybe we'll chat again in the future.
Sure, yeah. Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure. Thank you, Michael.
You have been listening to the Level Up English podcast. If you would like to leave a question to be answered on a future episode, then please go to levelupenglish.school/podcast. That's levelupenglish.school/podcast. And I'll answer your question on a future episode. Thanks for listening.